Hello friends. Did you know that nearly 80% of those who watch my videos aren't subscribed? If you enjoy the content, I'd truly appreciate it if you hit that subscribe button. It helps a lot. Also, don't forget to leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments. Your interaction not only supports the channel's growth, but also helps these stories reach more people. Thank you all for being here. By the way, where are you watching from? Let me know in the comments. Now, let's get started.
In every war, soldiers die. That is the brutal and terrible truth of armed conflict. Families grieve, names are carved into stone, and the world moves on. But there's something far worse than death in war. Something that haunts families for decades, something that leaves a wound that never fully closes. Disappearance. No body, no grave, no final moment to hold on to. Just a soldier, a son, a father, a brother who was here one day and simply gone the next, as if the earth opened up and swallowed them whole. Throughout military history, tens of thousands of soldiers have vanished without a trace. Most are eventually explained, killed in battle, lost at sea, buried in unmarked graves. But some cases have never been resolved. Some disappearances defy every rational explanation that investigators, military officials, and families have been able to come up with. These are three of those cases. 3 soldiers, 3 wars, 3 disappearances that nobody, to this day, has ever been able to fully explain. World War I, August 12, 1915, Gallipoli, Turkey. The Gallipoli campaign was already one of the bloodiest and most disastrous military operations of the entire war. Allied forces had been trying for months to push through the Turkish peninsula, suffering catastrophic losses at every turn. Men were dying by the thousands in the scorching heat, the mud, and the disease-ridden trenches. On that August morning, the 1st 5th Norfolk Battalion, a regiment drawn largely from men who worked on the royal estates of King George V himself at Sandringham, were ordered to advance toward a hill called Kavak Tepe. Around 250 men moved forward into the dusty terrain. 3 New Zealand soldiers watching from a nearby ridge later gave sworn testimony about what they witnessed that afternoon. They described seeing the Norfolk Battalion march toward a small group of low-lying clouds that had settled unnaturally still above the valley floor. Clouds that, according to the witnesses, appeared to have a strange brown or yellow tint, unlike any normal cloud formation. One by one, the entire battalion marched into that cloud. None of them came out the other side. The New Zealand witnesses said they watched the cloud for around an hour. They said it did not move with the wind. It simply sat there, and then, slowly, it rose and drifted away. The valley below was empty. The battalion was gone. 250 men vanished. The British military launched an immediate investigation. No bodies were found in the area, no evidence of a firefight. No Turkish prisoners had any knowledge of capturing or engaging the battalion. It was as if 250 trained soldiers had simply ceased to exist. To this day, the full fate of the 1st 5th Norfolk Battalion has never been established. Historians offer theories that they were ambushed, surrounded, and killed, but none of them fully account for the witness testimonies of 3 soldiers who watched an entire battalion march into a cloud and never come back.
If these stories are keeping you hooked, subscribe and stay with us in the dark. Let's proceed with the next story. Vietnam, 1968. The jungles of Quang Tri Province. Sergeant Robert Donahue was 22 years old when his 6-man reconnaissance patrol was inserted by helicopter into the dense jungle near the Laotian border. Their mission was standard: move through the jungle, observe enemy movement, report back,
extract in 72 hours. They radioed in on day 1. Location confirmed, no enemy contact. They radioed in on day 2, still moving, still no contact. On day 3, silence. Command tried to raise them on every frequency, nothing. A search and rescue team was inserted into the last known coordinates. They found the patrol's campsite still set up, rations half-eaten, radio equipment intact and functional, personal gear laid out neatly, a half-written letter home sitting on top of a pack. No blood, no signs of a struggle, no enemy activity in the area, no tracks leading away from the camp in any direction. 6 soldiers had been sitting in that camp, eating, writing letters home, and then simply stopped existing. The search team spent 4 days in the jungle. They found nothing. No bodies, no drag marks, no evidence that any enemy force had come within a mile of that position. Whatever happened to Robert Donahue and his 5 fellow soldiers happened without a sound, without a fight, and without leaving a single clue behind. All 6 men were officially listed as missing in action. Their families were told the military was still searching. The searches continued for years and then quietly stopped. Decades later, veterans who served in Quang Tri province during that period spoke of a phenomenon that locals had warned American soldiers about since the earliest days of the war. There were places in that jungle, areas the Vietnamese called Vùng Cam, forbidden zones. Places where people had been disappearing for generations long before any Americans set foot in the country. Places where, the locals said, the jungle itself was alive in a way that could not be explained. The patrol's last campsite sat on the edge of one of those zones. Robert Donahue and his men have never been found.
Afghanistan, 2009, Paktika Province. Private First Class Bo Bergdahl walked away from his outpost on the night of June 30th, carrying nothing but a compass, a knife, some water, and a camera. He left his weapon, his body armor, and most of his gear behind, neatly stacked as if he had simply stepped outside for a moment and intended to return. He never came back. What happened in the hours and days after Bergdahl walked off his base became one of the most haunting, controversial, and deeply strange disappearances in the history of the U.S. military in Afghanistan. Within hours of discovering him missing, the U.S. military launched one of the largest search operations in the Afghan war. Thousands of troops were redeployed. Every available intelligence asset was turned toward finding one missing soldier. The search consumed enormous resources, and according to soldiers who served with Bergdahl, at least 6 American soldiers were killed during the operations launched to find him. 6 men died trying to find one man who had walked off into the dark. The Taliban eventually released a video showing Bergdahl alive, thin, frightened, and disoriented. He would spend nearly 5 years in Taliban captivity before being released in a prisoner exchange in 2014. But here is where the story goes from tragic to genuinely strange. Bergdahl himself, in interviews and testimony given years after his release, described his time in captivity in ways that his own lawyers described as deeply disturbing. He spoke of losing his sense of time entirely, of periods he could not account for, of the places he was held that seemed to have no physical counterpart to anything he could later identify on a map, of nights in which he was certain he was in one location, only to find himself somewhere completely different with no memory of how he got there. Soldiers who searched for Bergdahl reported encountering things in the mountains of Paktika province that they have never spoken about publicly. One veteran, in a documented account published years later, described following what appeared to be fresh boot tracks across a section of mountain terrain. Tracks that simply stopped. Not at a cliff, not at a river, just stopped, in the middle of open ground, as if the person making them had stepped out of the physical world entirely. Afghanistan is ancient. The mountains of Paktika province have been walked by armies since before recorded history. Local tribesmen who have lived in those valleys for generations speak of them the way soldiers everywhere eventually come to speak of certain places, in hushed voices, with their eyes slightly too wide, as places where things happened that should not happen. Whatever walked Bo Bergdahl off his base and into 5 years of captivity, whether it was his own tormented mind, a calculated decision, or something far darker that still waits in those mountains, it created a chain of events that killed 6 American soldiers, haunted thousands more, and has never been fully or satisfactorily explained by anyone who has tried.
3 soldiers, 3 wars, 3 stories that history has never fully closed. The Norfolk Battalion that marched into a cloud and came out as a mystery. The 6-man patrol in Vietnam, whose camp was found perfectly intact, as if they had simply evaporated. The soldier in Afghanistan whose disappearance sent 1,000 men into the mountains and brought 6 of them home in caskets. War does things to people that cannot always be explained by bullets and bombs, and some places on Earth, some valleys, some jungles, some mountain passes that have absorbed centuries of blood and fear and death seem to do things to the men who pass through them that no training, no technology, and no official report has ever been able to fully account for. These men are still out there, somewhere. Subscribe for more true stories from the darkest chapters of military history. And if you or someone you know has a story like these, leave it in the comments, because there are more of them, far more.